Well, thank you very much. I have the onus of bringing people back in and waking you guys up from your food comas. Thank you very much to Jerry and Scott for inviting me, and the whole CanBIM team for hosting buildingSMART Canada. We're forging a better and better relationship, working together closely. I'm here to talk about the roadmap to Lifecycle BIM. Just sort of understand the context and the why that we did this. So I start this presentation with Kurzweil's laws of accelerating returns. This predicts that by 2040, the power of computing will be equivalent to all of humanity's computing power, and it'll cost about $1,000. So I just want to put sort of a perspective on the fact that if we think that right now this technology is being disruptive, I think we don't even have a clue of what's going to be in the next upcoming decades. That being said, I think we have to deal with what's happening now. And the thing is that BIM is up front and center. And to us, BIM is a catalyst. It's introducing sort of new processes and technologies and so forth. It's a philosophy, but it's making us question how we deliver and maintain our built environment. For us at buildingSMART, there needs to be a framework for that change. And there are three key elements to that framework, in our opinion: a strategy, a mandate, and standards. Because we're dealing more and more with computable information and data, the more and more we need to have those standards. These, of course, are interacting elements. And I think another recurring theme from today is the fact that BIM is not the end. BIM is not a goal in and of itself. We really want to improve how we build and maintain our built environment. So to me, that sort of frames within a national strategy for a built environment, in which we have yet to develop. And the roadmap is how we get there. A bit on buildingSMART Canada. We're part of buildingSMART International. We're the Canadian chapter of buildingSMART International, which is the home of open standards for the built environment. We're talking about industry foundation classes, model view definitions, and so forth, all which are the building blocks upon which we can build interoperable and collaborative processes and workflows. So why the roadmap? We've heard the presentations this morning were great and on point about saying, you know, we need to change, and there's growing consensus that we need to change. Why do we need to change? We need to improve the performance of our industry. We talked about productivity, we talked about quality, costs, and schedules, and so forth, those metrics. We have to generate better value. And when you look at the impact that the construction industry as a whole, I include designers, and has on the economy and the society as a whole, it's tremendous. We're also in the context of sustainability. So a big push on the government's part for sustainable development, and it's not going away. We saw this in Helen's presentation before lunch around others have determined that they need to change. And the UK has been thinking about this for the past 20 years. So they've really set forth these targets, which I won't go through because we already saw them. But one thing that maybe wasn't touched upon was the fact that they're looking at improving 50% of their exports. So what does that mean for Canada? Increased competition. It means that they're going to want to come and play in our backyard. So we need to, I think this needs to be sort of a wake-up call saying that we need to come up and be able to play in the same sandbox. There is no good data, or there's a lack of good data around where are we at in Canada. We heard Canada's 5 years, 10 years behind. I was speaking to Pietro earlier, and we disagree with that. Maybe there's There's people doing really good stuff. And I would say that the bleeding edge in Canada is on par with any bleeding edge around the world. The large corporations that have implemented BIM and have been doing so are really there. Now, the problem is the small and medium enterprises, the people that are the core generators of value. They're the ones that are maybe not as capable to make the change. So this data comes from a survey that we did in Quebec. It had 521 respondents, which is larger than the McGraw-Hill research. And we were looking at 31% of BIM adoption rate in 2015. So that, to me, and anecdotally, as we go across the country, seems to be a more reasonable number. We also looked at integrated approaches in lean design and construction, and we were all about 20 to 30% of adoption. So a lot of work to be done. We also identified some key drivers, and that's in the article. I'm going to plug the article in the excellent innovation, the CanBIM publication, where we talk about these key drivers for Canada. And I'm going to talk about a couple of them without going through them all. One of the things is public mandates. And I said, and you know, we have discussions around, do we need to mandate BIM? Do we have to obligate people to use BIM on projects? And we can discuss that, and I think that that's a valid point of discussion. Fact of the matter is, these countries have decided to say, yes, we do need to mandate BIM. And they're doing it within, you know, a 5-year timeline. Canada is nowhere to be found. And even at the provincial level, the only people that we see are stepping up to the plate are the Société Québécoise d'Infrastructure in Quebec that now have BIM and IDP, so integrated design process, built into their RFPs, and Alberta Infrastructure, which are still piloting on a couple of projects. I have no echoes in BC. There is no formal policy mandating BIM implementation on public projects. It's piecemeal. Certain authorities will ask for BIM in a certain manner, and so that leads to inconsistencies into how we develop BIM. And there are fragmented initiatives. There's the excellent initiative, the Moose Jaw Hospital, the IPD project, first IPD public body. They're the Red Deer schools in Alberta. These were Waterloo, the University of St. Jerome's campus, these excellent initiatives that were led by being the right person at the right place at the right time, being able to influence policy. If we look at the public sector in terms of supporting that, and when I asked my question to the minister this morning, I was just hoping for an answer along the lines that we will fund research and development in SMEs up to $200 million because the construction industry is twice as big as the tech industry in BC. So if they get $100 million, we should get $200 million, but we can discuss that with them at a later date. Just to put that into perspective, the UK put about $7 million just in their BIM task group. So they put a BIM task group together, not that big, very agile, but with $7 million Canadian, they were able to do a lot. Finland, Norway, which have a good history of a lot of, they believe in ER&D, they put up upwards of 25 million euros over 4 years. And Finland's the size of Quebec. So they sort of say, we need to do this. Singapore, that supported 50% of all costs associated to BIM implementation were supported by the government in Singapore while they were doing the implementation. And France just announced the 20 million euros for a roadmap for technological transfer. This comes from the BCCA report, which I was very glad to see come out, highlighting where do we stand in terms of funding and R&D in the province, and where does the construction industry stand, with others. And Helen did a great job of sort of highlighting that where it's non-existent. So this is the context in which buildingSMART Canada developed the roadmap. It's saying there's a limited rate of adoption. It's being adopted, but it's uneven. It's specific portions of the supply chain, so it's not everybody. Designers, yes, we heard mechanical and electrical, maybe not so much. General contractors, of course, there's value there. Mechanical subcontractors, there is, but that means there's inequalities across the supply chain. So how do we sort of try to level that? There's an inconsistent use. In the large urban centers, there's going to be a lot of BIM use. But what about rural or smaller cities? How can we look at developing capabilities there? And ultimately, that's it. There's a variable level of maturity and capability across the country. This, of course, hinders the potential value for Canada. So what is the roadmap? One of the things is that this roadmap was not developed. It was published in January 2015, so it's now 2 years old. It wasn't made in vacuum. We looked at what others have done, and that's probably the biggest benefit that Canada has. Lagging or not, we can agree, but or not how much we lag. The fact is that others have paved the way, and so we can learn tremendous amounts from other countries, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So the UK, they had a roadmap early on. Singapore developed their own roadmap, and looking at, they were really, trying to change their industry from a dirty and dangerous one to a productive. And of course, Singapore is developing their knowledge economy. So they had a clear goal in mind. Australia in 2012 developed their roadmap, which was very technology driven. So they were looking at what are the standards and so forth that we have to develop. And the one that I like a lot is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which have been looking at BIM since 2000, early 2000s, and the whole MILCON have undertaken this transformation. So, a call to action. We've heard this before, and I think this is seems to be a theme today. Is this was issued as a call to action, looking at how do we transform our industry? How do we reform our construction industry in Canada? Now, one of the things that we understand is that we have regional differences, and construction is a provincial jurisdiction. So is there a way to actually have a consistent national approach, yet inform provincial bodies, and then even drill down to the municipal level, which enforces the regulation? So that's a context that the UK doesn't have, for example, that it's a direct pipeline down to, through government to the industry. So the roadmap is based on 6 core principles. Engagement, you being here today, is that. CanBIM does an incredible job of engaging its members, engaging industry, and that we are really appreciative of. The development of technologies, of processes and standards, and we heard that we have to look at the NBIMs in the US, we have to look at the PAS standards in the UK. We don't have anything in Canada, and there's some stuff that's being developed, and I'll touch base on that at the end if I have time. But there are more and more increasing documents and lessons learned and resources out there to support this transformation. Education is a vital one, and CanBIM as well as buildingSMART have a joint education committee with working groups, and they're working towards developing curricula, developing learning outcomes, to really, how do we educate our next generations of professionals and construction managers and so forth to deal with this new reality. The fourth is looking at how do we deploy, so having the right contracts, having the right project environments. IPD is great, but it's maybe not the right approach for all projects. But how can we deploy BIM we could deploy BIM in a great setting in design, bid, build. How do we do that? Of course, evaluation, and that was one that was really touched on in terms of key metrics, benchmarking, having a system in place that we can compare. At this point in time, I don't know how the company beside me is doing. I don't know, am I way off? No idea. The UK has the KPI zone. And the US has the CII that does tracking. And of course, sustaining this effort. Having this consistency and actually ramping things up. Tomorrow we're not going to wake up and everything is going to change, but how do we sustain this transformation? So this is the core of the roadmap. You see the 6 streams here and their explanation along the right-hand side. Along the top, I actually have an animation to go with this. So along the right-hand side, you have the core principles. on the left side, you have desired outcomes and sort of what are the states that we were trying to achieve. And so just setting that first level of benchmarks. If we've rolled out the roadmap and if we've transformed as an industry, this is what it should look like. Along the top, anybody that's familiar with capability maturity modeling, out of Carnegie Mellon, this is it's steps. They're steps. We're not, like I said, tomorrow morning we're not going to say let's do BIM and wake up and we'll be all this unified and optimized industry. It's going to take steps, and we're going to have to go through the motions. One of the things that I have to highlight is that we talked about a unified and optimized industry. Now, unification doesn't mean homogeneous. Free thought and having conflict is not a bad thing. The type of conflict that it exists, that has to be looked at. But conflict at a basis is root of innovation, challenging each other. So that to us, just to make sure that when you say unified here, we don't mean homogeneous. A timeline. This was developed in 2014 and published in 2015. We had said by 2017 we should have these 4 activities, which I am glad to say are we're not that far off. So looking at developing national BIM standard, we have a working group that's coming online to develop that, and we'll be calling on CAN-BIM members and members of the committees. Looking at BIM guidelines in terms of toolkits, and there's a practice manual which I'll touch on, which is coming out. Looking at what's the curriculum, how should we be teaching and educating our students. That's coming out, that's issuing from the joint committees. And of course, aligning and maintaining, getting aligned and keeping that alignment with international standards. We do not want to do this in sort of in a silo, isolation. Of course, we sort of said 2020 plus. It seemed far. Now that's in 3 years. We're going to have to accelerate, step it up a notch if we want to have all the activities that are outlined here. But basically, this is just an action plan saying we have to change. What do we have to do to get to there? And that's what this is. I'll step through a couple of through the streams themselves. So the engagement, I said, was all around engagement. What have we been doing? So the CAN-BIM steering committees, they're by discipline. So you're allowed to join, and you can discuss things that are appropriate to your discipline. buildingSMART Canada, on its side, has free membership. We're at an advocacy group. We have free members meeting every month where you can learn and discuss and so forth. We have the affiliates initiative, so each city, we understand that this type of effort is a regional effort, it's a local effort, and so we have to have these communities of practices, and we're piggybacking on the Revit user groups that are now transitioning to a more open. So for instance, in Vancouver, we have BIM BC, which is supported by Summit AEC, and they have bi-monthly or quarterly meetings, but you have a community of practice and you actually see people. In terms of looking at this here is sort of outreach, the CAN-BIM regional sessions and satellite sessions, so being here today, as I said, and there's the buildingSMART monthly community members. In terms of developing the infrastructure and the guidelines and so forth, a national strategy. So I spoke about one working group for the standard. We're looking at launching another working group for the strategy. Now, the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of this happening with, for instance, the Construction Association, Canadian Construction Innovation Group. So we have to make sure we're not replicating and duplicating effort, that we're all working together towards this. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. The Canadian Practice Manual for BIM, which I'll touch on a bit later. In terms of education, there's a BIM and Education Committee. As I said, it's a joint committee with CAN-BIM, and the MOU has been signed. Right now, there's a BIM and education strategy that's being drafted and it's going to come out. And of course, there's the CAN-BIM individual certification that exists as a mechanism. And there are other initiatives in terms of certification that have been being developed. In terms of deploying, there's IBC's BIM contract addendum, which I'll touch on, which is a reference document that can be used. And we heard about it this morning, CCDC developing an IPD contract template. So we're starting to expand the realms of what a contract looks like and what a project team looks like. In terms of evaluate, and that's something that I spent a lot of time on is during my research to looking at benchmarking. What are the metrics that we can use and how can we visualize these metrics and so forth. So developing strategies to measure, evaluate, and assess BIM in Canada. There have been multiple efforts in the past. So 2008, there was a national effort. It fell flat. So it brings the question, should we do this as a national initiative or should it be a provincial initiative? We don't know, we don't have that answer, but there needs to be something there. And then conduct a national BIM survey, something that I have had on my plate for a long time based on the data that we had from the 2015, but we need to have good numbers on a Canadian level. And we need to have buy-in from industry and the governments to fund that type of effort. Lastly, to sustain the CanBIM Awards and the annual publication, which is available today. And we have increasing online presence. There's the BIM Guides Wiki, so that's a resource from buildingSMART International where you can go and all the guides from around the world are in one place. So you can go and compare and contrast. There's also, we're working on a forum for Canadian BIM managers. It's in piloting right now. We don't know if we're going to roll it out or so forth. So that's a roadmap, basically a way forward for us to look at how do we reform our industry. In terms of specific tools, I just want to run by that because I keep getting, well, there's nothing out there in Canada that's for Canada. I need to, I want to make sure that people are aware of these. So of course, the CanBIM annual publication, which you have on your table, and a good cross-section of different articles and so forth to just raise awareness of what's going on in Canada in terms of BIM. The Canadian Practice Manual for BIM, that's coming out this month, February. It's a 3-volume document. It was crowdsourced, so there's many people in the room here that actually participated in that. That was a joint effort again from buildingSMART and CanBIM. We had members from ACE-BIM in Alberta, Quebec, across a national effort. And it's split into 3. So a primer, which is just high level, and then we get into the company context and the project context, and what does BIM implementation look like in those 2 contexts. So like I said, February 2017, it will be English and French. It's being translated right now. There'll be digital and printed versions and discounts for academics use plan. The IBC BIM contract appendix is a document. What's interesting about this, and I do urge you to actually take a look at it. You can get a copy from CCA from IBC for just to peruse it, but it's a very focused element of BIM project execution planning, and it focuses on the outcomes and the elements that are within a contract that are contractually binding. And so it doesn't deal with hardware and technology and so forth. So the execution planning process is much wider than that. When you get into the protocol, you're saying, how can the mall be used? What is it used for? Who's doing it? And who owns what part of the mall? So getting beyond that contractual barrier, that's one of the first sort of efforts. And of course, lastly is the BIM PXP Toolkits. These are basically an extended version of how to develop a project execution plan. It was split into 3 because that's the reality of our industry: design, bid, build, and operate. And so you'll find stuff for everybody in terms of, what does a project execution plan look like? What is in it? How do I develop it? You have a template, you have examples, and so forth. It is based on the Penn State Project Execution Planning Guide, but it just basically unpacks it a bit more. And so we talk about the uses and goals, processes and exchanges, and then the supporting infrastructure. That, again, I think you can take a look at, or you can download at least the primers. So to conclude, I don't know how much time I have. I have 15 minutes left, but we started a bit late. I'm getting us back on track. 2:10, I'm right on time. Innovative approaches improve the performance and value generated. There's no debate there anymore. We need to change how we do stuff, and so the discussing that if the need to do that, I think is irrelevant. It's how do we do it. Governments around the world are driving a reform. They're seeing tremendous value that needs to be generated from the construction industry. And Canada can rely on international efforts. We talk about a single vision, and it doesn't have to be, how to say, hand in hand, kumbaya. We can disagree, but we at least have to push in the same direction. There is a need for reliable Canadian data. The stuff that comes from the US, it's great, but it's just not reliable. It's, the sampling is not there. At the core of any change in continuous improvement effort, you need solid data. You need to know where you're at, where you are right now to know where you're at. We want to take decisions on that. The first question is, should we mandate it? Well, we have to understand what does that imply and who's going to be affected by this, and if we want to move forward. National strategy for the built environment, and that's something that I'm glad to see that BCCA has put something out there. We're sort of all talking the same language, but the end goal here is having a better built environment, having a better industry. To conclude, BIM is a catalyst for change. The reason why we're here today is to understand, well, how do we embrace that change and how do we leverage it to deliver better projects? We need that regulatory and policy framework for that change. We can't just do these piecemeal. There has to be some underlying strategy and standard. And of course, this framework relies on a strategy, a mandate, and a standard. I'm going to end it on that. There is a video online. I'm not going to show it. It's 4 minutes long, and basically it sets out why the need to change. It's that call for action. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I love it how it ties into this morning. Erik, if I may ask the first question up here, what your very next step in your critical path? You've identified a number of areas, and you did emphasize the engagement steps, and you've got a lot of, I'll say, tangible next steps. But I was left wondering, is it government policy in your mind? Is it training? If there was that one next step that we just got that car stuck out of the mud and got it going, what's that one thing? We leave here today and we do this, we're going to get momentum.
I was going to make a joke going to the tech sector, but basically, to me, okay. Personally, I would like to see a strategy. I would like to have numbers, as Helen said this morning. We need to have targets and to initiate any effort. That would be personally my approach. But it has to be multi-pronged. The thing is, right now, the push is coming from the industry, and the minister this morning said something that was interesting around saying we're expecting you guys to tell us how to innovate and to give us innovation, but there's a bit of a contradiction with if they're still going to the lowest bidder, because that you understand what I'm saying is that it's incompatible. So I think government needs to be aware that public bodies that are procuring need to be made aware of this, and there needs to be representation. So groups like, I'm going to build onto that. There is no single vision or single voice in the construction industry. How can we lobby federal, provincial governments as a single entity saying, hey, we need money, we need $200 million as an innovation fund so our SMEs can actually innovate. So that's not one step. There's a couple of things,
no,
but
I love it.
they're vectors.
That's good. Are there other questions that we would like to bring up at this time from the audience?
Over here.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Erik. Just a comment and question. So we had our strategic planning session yesterday for CanBIM, and we spent a number of hours calling a cross-section of our membership directly, the senior leadership of those firms, architects, engineers, general contractors, software vendors. And the recurring theme that I picked up was that there is a need for a standard nationally that was pretty consistent. So it's great to see that that's also on your mind and a priority. My question is, the standard's a great thing, but we've seen in other countries around the world that it's the top-down push from the government that's really driving the change. Is there any, you talked about a strategy, is there any strategy on how we're going to engage our government to start mandating this Is it provincial? Is it federal? Like, what can we do?
Well, we operate at a national level, so we're representing through CCI, and I know you guys are involved with them too, to try to lobby basically at a federal level. Now, the thing is, the provincial, and it's actually the municipal governments are the ones that spend the most money on infrastructure. 60% of the spending is through municipal. So to answer your question, I think it has to be multi-pronged. I would like to see, there's a great model that's being done in Quebec and that's replicated not replicated, these emerged parallel in Alberta, so ACE-BIM, and there's a table sectorielle in Quebec, which is basically the associations, and all the big players come to a table. It's the IBC model, but more grassroots, and they're the ones that are going to be the ones petitioning for change. So in Quebec, we're working on a manifesto. So it's actually a manifesto to change for the government to recognize the construction industry as a value-adding industry that needs to be supported. We take the example in Quebec, the government just gave $250 million to the aerospace industry, and that's 80,000 jobs. It's 500,000 jobs in construction, and they have zero for innovation, and same thing with the tech sector here. It's 100,000 jobs, and there's $100 million, and you have zero, and it's 250,000 jobs in BC. So I guess to me, the strategy will have to happen. Is it organized by construction associations and so forth? That's why we're trying to launch a working group to just think, what does this look like? Who do we involve? And we're definitely going to be looking to you guys to be involved at all steps. So.
Yeah, we're happy to participate. But it does sound like provincially, that may be the way to go initially. I mean, I don't know. That's just my opinion, but.
No, I agree with you because
through the association, we have the power of these professional associations through your affiliation, and they're the one writing the contracts, and so I think we should really
absolutely
push back.
I agree.
Thanks.
The associations, it's just my opinion, and maybe it's who cares, but I want to say this. Sometimes the association takes so long. I think you bring a few really bright people like you together, and we show immediate results. Politically, bureaucratically, private capital markets, nothing will move in the way of results. I think that's our opportunity. And that's personally something I saw today. We're bringing a lot of the similar minds, different culture, different experience together, so I throw that out. And certainly we want more people promoting and lobbying and all the rest, but on the other hand, I think there's a very short-term opportunity for success. So I just throw that out. Helen, have you got a question?
I do, and great segue into conversations around what associations can do, because BC there's the BC Construction Association that we met this morning with Warren, but there's 4 regional associations too who deal just with the non-residential side of the industry. But their members are primarily small business. 75%, I think at least, of the BC construction companies have less than 10 people working for them. So I guess, Eric, my question to you is, to what extent will your strategy really deal with the realities of very small businesses having to deal with, fairly challenging technology investment, never mind the HR side of it, like having the capacity to be able to actually implement this stuff?
Well, that was sort of what I was trying to get at with having an investment fund to support that. Sorry, Dinos, I'm going to call you out. I don't know if he stepped out, but Dinos, he's with the Division 15 Mechanical, and he was in the report as cited as an innovator. And we were talking and saying, well, so they were there with BIM, and now they're like, okay, we have all these ideas, but we just don't have the bandwidth. Like we have to have some form of support to be able to take the next step. And so what is in place? And you mentioned IRAP and so forth. Those mechanisms are very clunky, and you're competing against all industries, whereas we would need a construction-centered fund to support those and the SMEs. And that's the key, is that the SMEs are the ones that have to be funded and supported, because they're the ones that are taking the brunt of the transition.
Just as one last thought, I've always had this dream that given the size of the industry, it's always amazing to me that we've never had a minister of construction.
Yeah.
You know, we have no leadership at either the provincial or federal level to really coalesce around. You know, we seem to fall into a dozen different departments. So I think if there's another thing to take away on the advocacy side is to Minister Verk, why isn't he the Minister of Construction?
Thank you for
I
that.
agree.
We'll move on to the next, but if I may, Eric, I'd like to thank you for a very insightful session, but also I thought it was beautiful how you tied it in on this morning and some overlap, but you just kind of solidified, brought it together, so.
Brought people back into the room.
Thank you so much.